Happy to meet you again.
And you need to mute, Alpha. There we go.
You're on, Jim.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we begin day 8 of our 10-day program on the Conference of Parties taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh. For 27 years now, the governments of the world have met in various cities around the world to discuss what they might collectively do in terms of our climate disaster that is befalling us everywhere around the world, as we all know, from the extreme weather events, the droughts, the floods, the fires that are quite literally besieging human civilization at this moment. We'll get into that program just momentarily. I want to focus also today just with a little update on what's happening in Iran. We've been tracking that extraordinary movement of spirit and people, where for the first time in modern history, young women, teenagers, Gen Zs have animated a revolutionary movement against one of the most repressive, almost obscene regimes in the world, a regime that is so focused on controlling women's bodies and what they wear that on the 16th of September, they beat to death a young 22-year-old Iranian woman, Mahsa Amini, because she didn't have her hijab, her head covering, on exactly correct. But that death completely animated a revolutionary movement. And I wanted to just note that because yesterday in Iran, there was a massive shutdown of shops, factories, offices, protests in the streets. And what we're going to be witnessing over the next several days is an upsurge of revolutionary movement, again, being catalyzed and led by young people. And that's why at Humanity Rising, we want to take note of it, even though we're focused on climate as our meta theme for this week. We also want to take note of how young people are making history and leading, even in the face of an extraordinarily repressive regime. And they're also leading in terms of climate, which we'll get to in a moment. But before we do that, let us pause, as we always do on Humanity Rising, and let us breathe together. We embrace all of us coming in. People are coming in. We have registrations from over 130 countries. We're broadcasting live over scores, hundreds of live channels over Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. And we want to take a moment, just as we begin our program, wherever you are, to just relax and breathe. And we do a particular kind of coherence breathing. You'll hear a sound of a bell in a moment that Raji, our technician, will put up, and just breathe in very slowly for about 5.5 seconds. You'll hear another bell, just exhale for 5.5 seconds. And we'll do that 10 times. We'll take 10 breaths together. It's one of the most ancient breathing practices going back thousands and thousands of years. And according to latest scientific research, coherence breathing, 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out, gives you 5.5 breaths a minute, and you bring in 5.5 liters of air. It is the single most effective way to regulate all your body systems and bring coherence between your heart and your brain, calm your emotional equilibrium, and animate your intellectual acuity, all by just simply breathing. In a world of chaos, in a world of escalating turbulence, one of the most important things that we can do is bring calm and acuity and coherence all at the same time, so that we can successfully navigate an increasingly chaotic world. That's why we breathe together. Encourage everyone listening to Humanity Rising, breathe. Thank you, everyone. Raji, let us begin. Thank you, everyone. It's always good to breathe together in the spirit of what Plotinus said several thousand years ago, that the whole universe breathes as one. And that's our aspiration for those of you joining Humanity Rising, as day by day we seek to promote and elevate all the goodness in the world. There's a lot of it. And this is particularly important to underscore as we consider what we are going to collectively do about climate. There are two things that are important to note about our climate situation. The first is that, as Tom Eddington, who I'll introduce in a few minutes, has said yesterday on Humanity Rising, we're transitioning from climate change to climate disaster. That is the stark reality of our world. We're in code red, as Antonio Guterres, the Secretary of the United Nations, has said repeatedly for the last year. Climate is now out of control. It's no longer a matter for humanity to try to change something, and if we do something, it's all going to go away. We are now in it, and the inevitability of escalating turbulence and climate disaster is our world. And the second very important fact is that our governments have decided for 27 years in a row, essentially, to do nothing and engage in what Greta Thunberg has said is essentially a blah, blah, blah. And so in that anvil, in that contradiction of climate disaster and government inaction. We, the people of the world, have to understand clearly, consciously, volitionally, that it's up to us. And so what we've been highlighting during our 10-day program is all the extraordinary work that has been going on around the world, from the NGO community, from the corporate community, from people even in government that are trying to get the governments to wake up. People all over the world are taking action, and that is where the change, in our view, will come. And it's within this context and in this spirit that I want to welcome Sue Lennox, who's the founder of Oz Green with her husband 30 years ago, and since then has been empowering over 1 million activities and people in scores of countries around the world, and has been one of the founders of Youth Leading the World. And we're very proud of our partnership with Oz Green and Youth Leading the World. And day by day, we've been beginning our program with Sue and different young people that she's gathered for our program, so we can experience the vitality of young people making a difference in climate. We've also had a partnership with Facing Future TV, which is in Sharm el-Sheikh there in Egypt. And they've had scheduling difficulties and Zoom challenges. But as they can, they've been entering our program to give us live updates about what's going on in that conference of parties there in Egypt. But Sue, I want to welcome you and thank you so much for everything you've done to empower young people to take climate action. I turn the program over to you.
Thanks, Jim, and good morning and wonderful to be with you again. We've had a delightful micro COP session last night, or let's just say a coming together of parties, and the parties in this case are those that really want to see change happen in the world and in their own countries. And we've invited Aisha and Alpha from Sierra Leone back to talk with you about what they've been doing over the weekend in terms of running their first Youth Leading the World program on the ground in Sierra Leone after 2 years of participating in the global online program. So very exciting to see that one happen. And then also to report back on the first global gathering that we had of Youth Leading the World facilitators that's happening over the next over 3 nights. We had our first night last night, and what that amazing group has come up with. And so over to you, Alpha and Aisha. Welcome again from Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Sue.
You can put your camera on, Aisha, if possible. Alpha,
Okay.
that'd be great. Wonderful.
So,
Great to see you again.
nice to
And
see you again.
would you like me to put that presentation on?
Yes, yes.
Sure.
Okay. And we'll get some photos of what's happening here. There we go. That one again. Do you want to just do a quick rundown of what you've been doing with
Yes, yes,
Youth Leading the World in Sierra Leone?
yes, yes. Let's do it now.
I think Alpha will go first.
Yes,
Okay, can you see the slides?
yes, I am seeing the slides.
Okay.
Good afternoon from Sierra Leone. I am Alpha Mohamed Kado, Youth Leading the World coordinator for Sierra Leone. We have done so many things to see that we reduce climate change hazards in our country. We have done sensitization, as you have seen on the picture. We have also involved youths, more than 200 youths, to be facilitators. We have planted trees with youths in order to rescue the situation of deforestation in our country, because we understand that flooding, landslide has been the order of the day in Sierra Leone. It keeps happening every year. So many people die every year, and properties are destroyed every year. Also, water in Sierra Leone is a problem for us. We only have water during the rainy season, and when it's dry season, it's hard we have water. So we see only 2% of the population in Sierra Leone have access to clean, readily, and available drinking water. And this keep happening mainly in the rural areas of Sierra Leone, where people walk for long distance to fetch water. And water has not been the only problem for Sierra Leone. We also have problem in energy. We don't have clean energy. And only 26% of the Sierra Leone population has access to electricity. And that electricity access based on the city, and people living in the urban areas has no way to access electricity. Also, Sierra Leone has gone through uh, riots that citizens protest against the government for the increments of prices in Sierra Leone. So for that reason, Youth Leading the World also went to massive food distribution, wherein, because of the situation, wherein people are locked down in their houses without no movement, people are restricted to go out and find their living. And in that situation, we see that how can people have themselves food? That was why we are asking people to donate, and we did a massive food distribution to families. Only 20, only 27% of people have food security in Sierra Leone. We have serious problem in food. Normally, the demand for food, for imported food, is so much high that most people are not growing their own food. For that reason, Youth Leading the World will be intending to also go in regenerative agriculture, wherein we involve youth to plant their food, to grow their own food. As an organization, as a group, we also see that girls' education in Sierra Leone is much important, because we understand that they are neglected. The girls are neglected in Sierra Leone. And when we do some research, we understand that 46% of girls aged 15 to 24 years are literate. Only 46% of girls between this age that are going to school, and the rest of them are not going to school, meaning the girls are not educated, the girls are not empowered, and they are valued in the society. They need to be considered. 40% of school age girls leave school due to poverty. They may want to empower themselves, but their family cannot support them do that. For that reason, they leave school just like that because of poverty. Youth Leading the World has been doing youth engagement, youth leadership for the previous years, from 2020 to date. We have been involving a huge number of people, huge number of youths. We bring them together. We tell them about climate change. We tell them about climate change, and we allow them to also go out and tell their colleagues. In the situation of food in Sierra Leone, we see it as an important factor that we say we must do food gardens in schools, in community, in order to rescue the situation of food. So we have been doing that. We have been doing school food gardens. We have been doing village food gardens. And we have been engaging the youth in regenerative agriculture, but that we have to do more as well. Well, presently, Youth Leading the World Sierra Leone is doing a youth summit within Sierra Leone and online youth summit as well, wherein we involve youth from different countries to talk about the climate change crisis. We have started our youth summit in Makini, Sierra Leone, and from the youth summit we did, our vision is deforestation is a crime to climate change. Trees have life, and life should not be destroyed. To cut one tree would necessarily mean plant two in replacement. Forests are maintained. We can't live without tree around us. Tree must be friends. Tree must be our friends in our environment. Plant more trees, plant more trees. That is our vision. And as youth, we also discuss our actions. What exactly we need to do to rescue the situation of climate change and to rescue the situation of deforestation in our country. So we give tact to all of us that all participants of the Youth Summit must plant a tree or two in in his or her own house. You must plant a tree or two so that you can have a tree. So you must have a tree that you can take care of. So that task was given to all of us as an immediate action that we must do to rescue the deforestation crisis in our country. And also we understand that deforestation happening mostly because of poverty. People cut down trees mostly to burn charcoal, and this charcoal they sell to have their living. So in that regard, one participant from the Congress, from our youth summit, come up with a technique, with a technology, how to burn charcoal without the use of a tree. I was so excited to hear that because that was my first time that I understand that you can burn charcoal without the use of a tree. So that technology was initiated to us, and we have to look at it, and we will engage those people cutting down trees for the purpose of burning charcoal. We engage them, we tell them the new technology, we tell them what to do so that they may reserve those trees for better purposes. And also, this youth summit we did, we are not only going to get these youth and leave them away. We have to involve them in our activities. We have to do massive tree planting, and this youth must be involved. We have to plant different areas within the country, areas that we think they have been damaged, areas that we think there are no forests, areas that we think there is a serious global warming. We have to tackle these areas, ask for support, and plant trees in these areas. Involve these youth because we think that youth have sustainable change and they are the only people to contact. In that regard, one of our action, our long-term action is to involve this youth in a massive tree planting as well. Well, after we've done this youth summit, our partner from Osgreen, Sue Linux, who helped us to establish Youth Leading the World in Sierra Leone, who did everything for Youth Leading the World to become an organization, a registered NGO in Sierra Leone, also thought it fit to also do the youth summit online for people in another country, to bring initiatives together, to create a vision, to work on action. So we have started the youth summit online today, this morning for Sierra Leone, and we have a lot of youth. We share a lot of ideas, and that was very, very, very much great. And there are concerns that we looked at today, which are very, very much important. One of them is
Alpha, I wonder if
deforestation.
Aisha would like to talk about this part of the program.
Yes, thank you.
No, I think Alpha was like carried away. He was enjoying. He enjoyed speaking. But he did great.
He did
Okay,
a
I
great
think
job, yes.
he did great. Yeah, amazing. So on global online youth online summit that we are supposed to have on starting on the 16th to the 18th. Today was our first day, and we discussed some of our top concerns from different people who were like present in the summit today. And some of these concerns were the deforestation, poor waterway management, water security, food security, treatment of women, ecosystem collapse, cost of living or housing crisis, poor roads, lack of capacity, learning, connection, impacts of climate crisis, flooding, extreme weather. And we discussed what are the drivers of these concerns, and this was what we arrived at: capitalist system and inequality, industrialization of everything, use of fossil fuels, and population, and lack of connection to nature, and also poor economic systems. Yeah. So the vision, after talking about all these concerns, all of us talked about the visions, how we want to see the world without all of these disasters or all of these problems. And one of our vision was our forests are protected, people have alternative sustainable income, we have actively engaged in regenerating the world or reforestation. There are strong local networks for food growing everywhere, including in cities. We are locally self-reliant for staple foods. We go locally, appreciate food, and learn from traditional ways and practice permaculture, organic farming, and regenerative farming. We grow what we eat. And the third concern was we live simply in communities of sharing, low cost of eco-housing options, make housing affordable and accessible to all. Rocket stoves and solar energy are affordable. Community systems make energy accessible for all. Homes are for living in, not investment and wealth generation. And the fourth vision was we are informed and sensitized about the climate crisis. We are prepared to act and recover and have the capacity to minimize harm. There are local food banks for managing disasters. There are local community systems in place to monitor and report dangers and assist recovery. And moving over to the other visions, our rivers are protected and riparian zones restored. There is safe and accessible drinking water for all. People are educated about and respect the importance of waterways. Women are equal and protected from violence. There is safe and quality education for all children. Women are empowered, respected, and valued. Women have an important role in leading change. There are systems in place to support women undertake further education. Our economic systems foster living within the limits of one planet. They are based on principles of localized economies, equity, fairness, and sustainability. Products are useful, practical, resilient, repairable, and reusable. Carbon impacts are minimized and incorporated into accounting systems. That was the visions that we discussed today, according to all the concerns that we stated. These were our visions of how we want to see the world without all those concerns.
Wow. Thank you, Aisha. And just to finish, how did you find working together as a global team on this big plan that we're developing?
Well, it's inspiring. I find it inspiring because when you get to share ideas with people from different nations, different countries, come together, share ideas, change ideas, change stories. It inspires you to be, it just inspires you to try to create change, to try to, it gives you more ideas on how to work on solving our problems that we're facing. Yeah, it like earlier as an individual, I had no business thinking about the earth, about Mother Earth, about climate change. That was never in my head. But after meeting you, speaking to you, connecting with you, now I can say that I am a different person. I think every day I think of new ways in which I can help change, make the world a better place. So coming together with different people globally, is so inspiring. So that is what I think about it.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And
I can say it has changed me a lot.
I'm so delighted to have the pleasure of knowing you both, and I look forward to seeing you again tonight as we move on to the next stages of going, well, here's our vision. How are we going to achieve it? What are the change strategies and action ideas? And I think this will set us up to keep us busy for the rest of our lives. So thank you for all that you do to inspire the world as well. And back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Sue. You might stop your share screen. There we go. There we go. And thank you, Alpha and Aisha. Wonderful to hear from you. And good luck with everything that you're doing. And you're right, Sue, this is really the rest of our lives, dealing with climate disaster, one location, one project at a time. So thank you so much. And thank you for getting up so early in the morning there in Australia. And we'll see you again tomorrow.
And good night.
Good night. All right, everyone, let us launch in. I want to introduce my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington. He's a very successful business executive and consultant. He's the founder and CEO of Endangered Global. He has a passion for the environment, for nonviolence, and for social innovation. And he's put together 3 of our 10 days for our COP program on the innovations that businesses are making to deal creatively with climate disaster. And as I indicated earlier, it was Tom that really refined for us all that we're no longer dealing with climate change. We're actually dealing with climate disaster. And it's very important in our language to be accurate about our situation. So Tom, I want to thank you for that refinement. And it really focuses our attention. And I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Sue, and appreciate you bringing the young folks into the conversation during this COP27, a couple of weeks of programming. As Jim said, I mean, and as our guest, John Montgomery, panelist yesterday talked about, we as a species need to move from a petroleum-based energy system to renewable energy system. It's one of the biggest contributors to the climate disaster that we're experiencing. And having thrown excess carbon into the atmosphere over the last 150 years, we've now accumulated over 300 gigatons of excess CO2 into the atmosphere, which has resulted in the warming of our atmosphere and the resulting climate disaster we're dealing with. And so I'm delighted to have two panelists today, two leaders in industry that are helping to deal with those two sides of the equation. One is, how do we move to renewable energy? Our current systems of transitioning will take us about 75 years, which we don't have. And how do we remove that excess CO2? So I'm delighted to welcome our panelists today, Wayne Van Dyke. Wayne began his business career on Wall Street at DLJ, first as an investment banker, then a venture capitalist, and then co-managed an LBO leveraged buyout fund. He left to found Wind Farm Limited, the first utility wind energy development company, where he built a staff of 60 developers. In 1990, he became CEO and chairman of the San Francisco-Moscow Teleport and installed the first 500 lines direct dial telecom to Moscow. As an entrepreneur, he started companies in employment, corporate training, and business software. Today, he's dedicated to slowing climate change by applying fintech to financing solar and storage projects. Also joining us today is Larry Kopal. Larry's the co-founder and president of the Carbon Underground. Considered a leading brand building architect, Larry spent over 20 years at some of the world's leading advertising agencies, overseeing advertising for companies ranging from American Express, McDonald's, to Honda and Pepsi. Although coming up with the creative side, his strategic analysis and development were always a critical part of his mission, which enabled him to help launch some multi-billion-dollar brands. But in 2010, Larry made the shift to using his expertise to create positive social change and co-founded Kopal Stranger, a change agency committed to growing business while simultaneously creating positive change in the world. A committed environmentalist, director of Greenpeace, Oceana, 1% for the Planet. In 2014, Larry co-founded the Carbon Underground, an organization focused on helping nature draw carbon back down from the atmosphere and returning it to the soil to help stop and even reverse climate change. Today, the Carbon Underground works with corporations, governments, the UN, universities, and groups representing millions of farmers from around the world. So I want to welcome Larry and Wayne and look forward to our conversation today.
Good to be here.
Good morning. So Larry, why don't you start and just share a bit more about your background and history and how you came up with the Carbon Underground and the work that you're doing?
Sure. I think, you talked about my past resume, probably enough for everybody. So let me move on to what we're trying to do now. And what really happened was, as mentioned, I was on the board of directors at Greenpeace, and we were hosting, a business partner and I were hosting the Greenpeace board retreat at an eco resort in Costa Rica that we're involved in. And we had a number of the top scientists, climate scientists in the world come down. This was in 2014, and basically say to us, it's too late. This was in 2014. They said, we have 15 years and it's game over. And there is nothing we can do. We're past the point of no return. Natural systems are going to start to snap. And they went home. And we're all sort of wondering, how do we go home and face our children? And an interesting thing was brought up about the fact that around the world, scientists were starting to see a link between the health of soil and climate change. And as somebody who lived in business, but also lived in the environmental world, I had never heard anything like that. So I started looking into it. And my partner and I also, on the board of Greenpeace with me, we found that it was perhaps the most powerful tool we have at dealing with climate change. And I'll get into that in a second. But we founded the Carbon Underground to bring our legacy carbon back down. And let me explain for a second, if I can, why that's so important and why it's so possible. And that's really, really important. And by the way, every one of those scientists, if you were to talk to them today and say, what do you think about your 15-year prediction, which we have about 6 or 7 years left, they would all say, the data unfortunately still point to that. However, there is this thing going on with soil that could mitigate it. So there's hope here. Let me start with a statement. We've heard today about the effects of climate change. Earlier in the opening, we heard about the droughts and the floods and, melting glaciers and all the things they're talking about at COP and we all experience every day. And I want to make a point here, which is none of that, not one drop of rising sea level, not one rise in humidity in a city, none of this was caused by future emissions. And yet, that seems to be our strategy to deal with climate change. Let's reduce future emissions. Let's go to net zero. Let's go to climate neutral. And that's what's going on in COP, right? That's the discussion. And I want to make another point, which is according to major scientists at NOAA and the Department of Energy and great science centers around the world, if we had a magic wand and we could wave it today and eliminate 100% of current anthropogenic emissions, 100% of emissions, you know what it would do for climate change? Nothing. And that's because of the 300 billion tons that we've already put in the atmosphere. And when you emit carbon or CO2 into the atmosphere, it takes about 50 years for that carbon, that CO2 to start damaging the atmosphere and hurting the climate, which means the climate change we're experiencing today is a gift from our grandparents. And most of the human emissions have happened in our lifetime, which means we ain't seen nothing yet. So if we don't draw that back down, all the efforts to get to carbon neutrality, climate zero, all of those will not work. Now, let me get you to the good side. The UN said in 2013, wake up before it's too late. The way we grow our food has killed or degraded 70% of the topsoil on the planet. That topsoil, this is really important. I mean, it's time for the science lesson here. We all know about photosynthesis, right? So photosynthesis, we use sunlight, we bring carbon down from the atmosphere and the plants use it and they make glucose and the sugar feeds them. They take a little bit of that, but the bulk of it exudes out the roots and feeds the 7 billion organisms in every teaspoon of healthy soil. When the soil is not healthy, those organisms don't exist, and the demand to bring the carbon down goes away, so nature leaves it trapped up in the atmosphere. Soil can be restored pretty quickly. We've heard talk of regenerative agriculture, and it actually works. And so I just want to do a little number tumbling here very quickly to give you a little bit of hope here on what we can do. And we are working with very large companies and governments to enable some of this to be happening at increasing scale. So let's use that 300 billion tons that have to come back. We have to draw that back if we're going to deal with climate change, if we're going to extend the window to allow renewable energy and emission reduction to have an impact. We have to draw that back. So there's about 5 billion hectares of land around the world used to grow our food. It's an accepted estimate that we can probably achieve 10 tons of drawdown per hectare per year if we restore all that soil. That's an aggressive number, but it's absolutely doable. So that's 50 billion tons a year. It takes 2 billion tons to move the parts per million in the atmosphere by 1, up or down. So if we're bringing 50 billion tons down a year, that's 25 parts per million that we're reducing every year. We only have to reduce it. We're at 420, we have to go to 280, it's 140. So granted, yes, we're still putting carbon in, so it's not a net reduction, but it shows just how possible we can do this. And so our focus is to work on what we call the other half of the solution to climate change. They are two completely interdependent halves. We must stop digging the hole. We must stop putting more carbon and other greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. But we also have to draw that legacy carbon back down. And I'll be quiet here. I just want to leave you with one other number because it's kind of fascinating. You know, Bill Gates said in his book on climate change, if only we had an army to work on climate change, we could actually get something done. Well, Bill, if you're listening, we have an army. We have the 2 billion people on Earth that grow our food. That's an army. That's a heck of an army. So if we can get those people to be growing food in a regenerative way that restores and maintains the health of our soil, we're going to maintain the health of our climate. It's going to happen. And I'm going to use that 2 billion number one more time, because this is sort of the choice in front of us right now. The Pentagon, about 10 years ago, said that by 2035, there would be 1 billion environmental refugees on the planet because of climate change. They just doubled down. They said there's going to be 2 billion environmental refugees. And so we can either use 2 billion people to restore the planet, or we can have 2 billion people desperate for food and water. And the reason the Pentagon got involved is they think it's the biggest national security issue in the history of the world. So I'll stop now. We can do this.
Thank you, Larry. Wayne, let's talk about the other side of the equation of what can be done and how do we get there on the stopping putting CO2 into the atmosphere.
Well, when I looked at the issue and started looking at this issue many years ago, which was precipitated by being involved in the first. I actually was involved during the first oil embargo in a snowstorm where I got snowed in an all-electric house with no electricity for 5 days, which made a very strong impression on my psyche about what the world without energy would be like. And that was the beginning of my journey into the, let's call it, climate restoration. Originally, I thought the problem was going to be one of peak oil, that we were going to be running out of energy. And so I undertook a program to start to develop a company that would enable large utilities to start to embrace renewable energy technologies, which at the time were hippie technologies. So basically, I spent 6 or 7 years developing wind farms, large-scale wind energy projects, and was supported by Chevron. Over the years since that time, I began to continued to work on the energy problem, but I began to see the energy problem morph from an energy shortage to a climate crisis. That the energy systems that we were using were actually destroying the climate faster than we were running out of oil. So I decided to change my strategy and focus on something that would accelerate the clean energy revolution. And when you look at the problem of trying to reduce the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere, which means decarbonizing our existing energy systems, what you see is that there's kind of two general strategies that the world has been pursuing. One of them is the belief based on a lot of people who live in the world of technology that technology is going to solve the problem. However, when you look at the problem, and when you look at the way technology has been developing, and when you look at the dynamics of the evolution of new technologies, what you see is that a new technology, if you had an idea today for a new kind of energy system of some kind, and you started working on it, it would take you about 10 years to kind of develop the idea into a possible commercial application of some kind. It would then take you another 10 years to start to commercialize that, and it would take another 10 years beyond that to scale the technology so that it could start to have an impact. That means if you had a new technology today, you're probably 30 years out before you're going to have any significant impact. What that says is that we don't have time now. The curve is got to be flattened much more aggressively than we've been doing it. And the only way to do that with regard to changing our energy mix from fossil fuels to renewables is to deploy the technologies we have much faster than we're doing it right now. And when you look at that, when I started looking at that problem 7 or 8 years ago, what I saw was that the biggest problem holding back the clean energy revolution, other than government policy, it would certainly help if we had a national or an international strategy, and it would certainly help if we had an international tax on carbon to rebalance the system. But short of that, the biggest problem that I saw with regard to what's holding back the clean energy revolution is access to capital. Capital is the one thing that's common to all kinds of energy systems, and without the capital necessary to deploy these systems, then it's going to take a lot longer to get them out there. And when I looked at that problem, what we saw was that the system, or the way, the methodology or the process by which we commit capital to renewable energy projects today is a manual system. And in the world of manual systems, the process, which is called project financing, the process that people go through to finance projects, is basically very slow, inefficient, and most importantly, really doesn't scale to meet the problem that we've got in front of us. And so when we looked at the problem in more detail, what we saw was that if you look at the energy systems that are most likely to have an impact most aggressively on the climate crisis, or on the reduction of CO2, the reduction of fossil fuel technologies, the one technology that stands out the most is solar. When you look at the price of solar, the cost of solar costs have dropped about 20 times. By 2030, they will have dropped 20 times, and that storage or batteries will have dropped by 45 times, which means that within the next few years, solar and storage will be the cheapest form of clean electricity everywhere in the world. And when you start to run some numbers, what you see is that by 2030, there'll be about $1 trillion a year needing to go into renewable energy or into solar and storage projects. And according to the IEA, that needs to be sustained for another 20 years. So that means we've got to put about $20 trillion to work in the solar business. So what we've been doing is developing technology to automate that process. And so using advanced information and automation and AI technologies, advanced information and communications technologies, we have found a way to accelerate the deployment of capital by 2 to 4 times and reduce the cost, which means that it reduces the cost of capital, which means you could get more projects built. So our company is in the business of automating the process of project financing in the hope that we can accelerate the clean energy revolution.
Thank you, Wayne. And what I appreciate, and what you both have brought to this this conversation, is just, helping people understand that there's two parts to this equation. One is, how do we bring that, 150 years of human history of putting all this excess CO2 out into the atmosphere, and how do we prevent it from continuing to go into the atmosphere going forward? And, picking up on something you shared, Wayne, there's a lot of focus on technology as the solution, but it's completely lacking wisdom. And Larry, what you shared is the technology already exists, whether we're talking about restoring half the topsoil that's been lost on the planet, or returning the planet to the 4 trillion trees that we need, or restoring the health of the oceans, or restoring the grasslands. The technology is there. And it's not the fancy, exciting technology that's going to come out of the lab, but the technology does exist. And if we reconnect ourselves with Mother Nature, we can solve this problem in the time frame that we need to.
I think I'll jump in and say I think that's absolutely true. If we think we're going to control nature, we're just going to see a further decline in the health of the planet and our future. I'd like to talk for 1 second about what you said, though, about nature-based solutions. We do live in a world where business has most of the power. Whether we like that or not, business has most of the power. And I tell people who get upset when I work with giant corporations, big global corporations, we'll work with anybody. We don't really care. We want to save this planet. And I say that, I had to give up my purity card a long time ago. You just do. And that may feel better on one end, but it gives us greater potential on the other end. But what business demands today, business demands data in order to make educated decisions and work with somebody like Wayne in the financial element of how all of these projects get done. And what I will tell you is, when you say we have the technology, we do. Nature's figured this out. I was speaking at Harvard not long ago, and a student challenged me and very upset with me because I was the guy who caused climate change, which I copped to. My generation, great, okay, guilty, but we're trying here. And he said to me, do you have any proof that what you're talking about will work? And I said, yeah, we have about 500 million years of it. And it's absolutely true, but that doesn't help business invest money. It doesn't help business decide how to design their programs. And what I will tell you is the investments going on in data in what happens below the ground is relatively new. And as opposed to emissions are very easy to measure. I have a machine, I know what the emissions are coming out. I can measure the cost of a kilowatt. I can do all of that. But remember when I said there are 7 billion living things in a teaspoon of healthy soil? There's also 100,000 species. And we have to understand how all of that works together. I couldn't say, go out and measure a forest and tell me what makes it a forest. It's impossible. And because God or nature has spent a long time figuring out that whole interaction. And so we desperately need investments in technology. And I can tell you the Carbon Underground, we're working on what we believe is a breakthrough technology to enable us to measure what happens underground differently than we've ever been able to do it before. And I'll just give you a little hint. It's by looking at soil as a living thing, not an inert crust of the planet. And it's literally changed the quality and the cost of the data that we're getting back. And it's looking very, very hopeful. But, Wayne made a point of how expensive this is going to be. And I think you used $1 trillion a year for 20 years. Sounds like a lot of money. Estimates are that restoring soil globally would be $8 trillion. In 2009, we, the people of the world, spent $13 trillion bailing out the banks. is it not worth that to bail out the planet? That's what Humanity Rising needs to make happen. That's what we have to demand, that we spend as much as it takes to bail out the planet as we did to bail out the banks. And when you put it that way, it's pretty obvious, that this is not only a great investment, but the return on that investment, and I'm sure Wayne can talk about that, till the cows come home, and hopefully they will come home. I can tell you that in restoring soil, the investment, according to Project Drawdown and other meta studies on this, can be 12-to-1 return. It's not an expense. It's like renewable energy. You spend a little up front, you save a whole lot more over time. It's the same thing. That's what we have to get people thinking and, quite frankly, demanding. Silence.
Wayne, would you like to share a bit more?
Well, the only comment that I have with regard to that is that I think of the great psychologist Carl Jung, who said the biggest problem with modern man is this disconnectedness from nature. And I think of that often. And what Larry's doing is critically important, obviously. And so I think what everybody is doing is critically important at this point. We've got to get all hands on deck. And I wish that we could somehow get a carbon tax so that we could start to rebalance the system, because that would force a lot more people on deck. So
anybody who hasn't read The Ministry of the Future, that's your reading assignment.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful novel by Kim Stanley Robinson about carbon being the currency of the planet, literally. And it's amazing, very powerful.
Absolutely, totally recommend it.
To the point you just brought up about Young and our disconnect from nature, throw something out just again to get us all thinking. I don't know what to do with this. It's quite frightening in that respect. There's a futurist, Marco Wallenius in Finland, who was curious why virtually every species that we could examine on Earth is adapting and changing because of climate change. Trees are walking. We all know that birds are migrating differently and going to different elevations. And then there's this species called humans that we really don't seem to be doing anything. We're not, it's getting worse and worse by the day. And what are we really doing differently to change this? And his research led him to a fascinating hypothesis, which is that the reason humans are not connecting viscerally to what's happening with nature, what's happening on our planet, is not that we don't experience nature. We're all living in cities now, 60% of the planet. It's that by moving to cities, we have broken our evolutionary path, which is a nomadic evolution where we had to follow the seasons and follow the harvests and follow where the food was. And by living in cities and no longer doing that, we're no longer psychologically connected to nature. I don't know what to do with that. I actually think it's fascinating, and probably there's massive truth in what he's talking about here. I don't think we're going to get everybody to leave cities anytime soon, although COVID's helped. It's one of the blessings of it. People have realized that our dependence on globalization is pretty scary, and local resilience is probably one of the most important reasons why people call the carbon underground. How do we fix our soil so we have food locally?
To look at that a little closer, Larry, I totally agree with you, and I look at it as feedback loops. When the Indians lived on the land and they started to see the creek dry up, they started to conserve water. But when you look at the fact that all of our water comes out of a tap and we don't really see the decline of the reservoirs in Northern California, we just continue to use the water. So the feedback loops have got to be improved so that we can see, so that everybody can participate in the process of understanding what the real issue is. I'm not quite sure how we improve all of those feedback loops, but it's an issue that we've become disconnected from our sources.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's some wonderful initiatives that we're seeing, whether it's in the NGO space where you've got green schools where they're creating gardens for students where they're getting reconnected to soil and understanding plants and how things grow. We're seeing opportunities to take kids back into nature. We've got films like Louis Schwartzberg's Fantastic Fungi and others, where there are opportunities to reconnect with nature in the ways that seem to have an opportunity for impact. But you're absolutely right. Until people can make the distinction between dirt and soil, or some of the other things that can help reconnect, it's a fundamental problem. And earlier this year, one of the guests on Humanity Rising was Charles Eisenstein, and Charles said he didn't worry about climate change and the destruction of the planet. What he worried about was the dystopian future, that we would be living in concrete buildings, watching augmented reality or virtual reality of nature, and that would be the future of our species, that we would be completely disconnected from nature. And for him, that was a much scarier future. And I get that. I mean, we've seen it in sci-fi films for the last I don't know, 50 or 60 years of that dystopian future. And that feels like has a higher likelihood with that continued disconnect from nature.
Absolutely.
The wonderful question of when did our future go from being a promise to being a threat is just an astounding thing to process. And how do we turn it back? I have a 16-year-old daughter who just is terrified of what's coming, and should be.
And one of the guests we had back in June during a youth mental health crisis series we did was Jane Goodall, and the focus was on environmental anxiety that is now a medical condition for not just youth, but especially for youth. And how do we help address that? And so she's got an initiative, Roots to Shoots, where she's taking kids out into nature and having them reconnect with the land. That same week, we had Dr. Lisa Miller from Columbia University Teachers College, where she talked about the work she's doing to bring spirituality back into the classroom, back into companies and organizations, civil society. And that, having that spiritual focus, not religious, but spiritual focus, is another opportunity to help us bring that connection back to nature. And just, for any of us who've spent time in nature, we know how restorative it is. We know how exhilarating it is and how it can help with whether it's our mental mindset or our physical health, or just enjoying and being in nature.
I noticed that my connectedness to nature comes from the fact that I live on a houseboat in Sausalito, and every day I participate in the sea life and the birds and so on that are all part of the interface between the land and the sea, and it always reconnects me to the organic natural processes, which feeds me, because I have to work in the world of technology. And to the extent that so much of our world has now gotten sucked into the screen, where everybody seems to be losing their connectedness to nature. So we've got to somehow find a way, and maybe we have to do it through the screen, because that seems to be the way that most people are getting their view of the world. Somehow connect the screen to nature.
God, I hope not. It doesn't work the same way. I really hope not. You know, I like to say anybody who's gone out in nature and hugged a tree and not felt that energy coming back to you is doing it wrong. You know, I hope we don't have to do this through a screen and augmented reality. And, you know, maybe it's a motivator to get people to go out in nature. But what you talked about, seeing the sea life in the water, and, you know, I live in LA, big city, but I go hiking in the mountains and go by the beach, you know, as often as I can. And I spend more and more of my time at our farm in Costa Rica, where we do a ton of research on bringing land back. And it's just so inspiring to watch the wildlife come back as you get the chemicals out of the land and nature takes over again. It's astonishing. It happens in a matter of a year or two. It starts to happen. It's incredible. Yeah, and it's good for the soul. It's good for the soul.
Well, Jim, I'd like to invite you back into the conversation, and Tamsin, if you'd like to join us as well.
Yes, Wayne and Larry, I'm co-moderating the COP program with Tamsin Willie Barker, evolutionary anthropologist you probably already know from her book Teaming. And but I want to just say before Tamsin comments, Wayne, I was so struck by what you were saying before that it's worth underscoring that we're not being victimized by CO2 in the future. We're being victimized right now by CO2 that our grandparents developed. And so while we have to lower the CO2 emissions, we've got to remediate as quickly and as urgently as possible along the lines, Larry, that you were describing as well, just to stay even. Just to stay even. And I think that's at the heart, Tom, of why you're wanting us to switch our language from climate change to climate disaster. I think the two of you have given us a measure of the urgency that we face, but also the simplicity of where the solutions actually lie. And so I just want to thank you both for that. And Tamsin, you know a lot more about this than I do with your work on superorganisms. So I'd just love to have you comment and join the dialogue.
Oh, thank you, Jim. This has been really great listening to you guys, because it all seems to reflect, you know, what I've observed about the way that living things work and the way that human societies work. And like, this is so frustrating listening to the COP27 talk. All the solutions are so big and global, and it's just more of that, you know, canopy solutions and, you know, but so what we're needing is a paradigm shift from the atmosphere to the soil. And I think that our funding and everything else has to reflect that. But it's like you say, all the solutions are there on the local level, on the community and the soil, but we don't fund that. And I thought it was interesting, Larry, what you were saying about how the return for putting all of this back into the soil, 12-to-1. So if we can make the business case there, it seems that it could be very simple. But again, it's always these big entities want to, you know, make a return on investment, and that seems to be the limiting thing. But if we can shift that to the profits in the soil and in local communities and structure for trust in commons again, seems like we could do it.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is, you know, not only do you get the financial impact of the return by restoring the soil, but it also impacts our healthcare system, because you have fewer, whether it's asthma or other climate-related illnesses. But then you take it a step further, all of a sudden, the food that's coming out of the ground is much more nutrient dense. It improves human health. And so the ROI is way beyond the 12 times return.
Jim, let me throw a specific on that. We were contacted by the Global Health department at UCLA. And they said, we'd love to meet. They said, our reason for existing is to reduce the cost of healthcare around the world. And they said, we believe that restoring soil is the single greatest thing we could do to affect that. And I said, okay, keep talking. And they mentioned what you just said. They said, you know what? If soil is healthier, the food has more nutrition. It's more nutrient dense. But they said the path to getting to healthier soil is to stop using the chemicals. So we're not eating chemicals either. And they estimated that restoring soil would save 25% of the global healthcare cost, which is $5 trillion a year. So where's Wayne? I just got you your money.
Yeah, and
this is real.
Wait, Larry, can you repeat that again? That's an astonishing bit of data.
That the projected savings from eating food with more nutrition and less chemicals is that we could save 25% of the global healthcare costs, to say nothing of the pain and suffering, which translates to about $5 trillion a year that governments would no longer have to pay. Or in America, we would no longer have to pay.
That's astonishing.
Yeah, it's astonishing. This is what we're talking about here.
When I listen to this conversation, I often think of the issue that I think is fundamental to trying to solve this problem, and that is the interconnectedness of everything. And when you look at it from a systems point of view, you start to see how things are interconnected. But we as a society, particularly in the West, have started to look at the world as specialists. And what's really required is we need generalists. We need to see the interconnectedness of the various systems before we can start to change those systems. And as I like to say, the specialty of the future should be generalism, so that we can see those interconnectedness. We can see that interconnectedness.
I would go further and say that everybody should be a biologist first. You know, an MBA doesn't even take a single biology class. So how, like, if our leaders don't even understand the way evolution works and ecological patterns and the way things relate to one another, how are they supposed to design anything that makes sense? I say we put all the MBAs in the biology department.
You know, your problem is you're bringing common sense into this.
Well, let's drill down on that for a moment, because I think the point that you were making earlier, Wayne, around Jung's point, that the heart of our predicament is a humanity's detachment from nature. And he made it actually within the context of trying to explain the rise of Nazism in Germany. He said at the root of their collective mass hysteria was a disconnection from nature. And I want to ask this within the context of a book recently published by Suzanne Simard, Finding the Mother Tree, which is another book well worth reading, because what she points out is that as a forester and as a scientist, she was developing all this research, all this data about the reality of the forest as a single ecosystem in the face of an industry that is reductionist and wanting to grow one tree, eliminate all the weeds, and thereby putting in something that is short-term profitable, but long-term completely devastating. And she was fought, and it continues to be fought every step of the way by the industry, not because they don't understand the truth of what she's saying, but because they're locked into a way of understanding, let's call it global capitalism and the imperative of the market in relationship to something that they view only as a commodity. So while it's easy to say, that we need to return to nature, and we all agree with that, the pathway through a corporate political worldview that is reductionist at its very heart leads us to a question. And this is why I would start with you, Larry. It's not so much in my view about data. I think the data's in for the companies. Isn't it more a question of worldview and structural constraints that are bigger than the individual corporation?
That was loaded.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Wayne.
That was loaded.
And I don't know, I'd love to agree with you, but I don't know that's necessarily apples and apples to
Okay.
corporate.
Expand on that.
Yeah. The data are in about what we need to do, how we get there. And if I am a food company that has 250,000 farms around the world that are supplying ingredients to me, and I want to help them restore their soil, the path to doing so is different in the dry Sahara than it is in the rainforest. It's different in Kansas than it is in Vermont. And it makes it very difficult for them to figure out what to do and how to invest and how to measure progress in restoring the supply chain at the front end. So I do, as I said to the student at Harvard, yeah, we have 500 million years of data on this, right? On the other hand, we have to have a little bit of sympathy for these companies that are truly committed to doing this. I think we just had the 7th food company commit $1 billion to changing their agriculture from industrial to regenerative, and they need help. They need help. In fact, Mars Corporation, the chief technology officer for their agriculture, said, if we had better data, that $1 billion would go down to $500 million, and we could get there faster. So it's kind of both.
Yeah. Good point. Very good point. Could you elaborate just for a moment on you said it's the 7th agricultural company,
right?
So is it your view that Big Agra is actually getting it and is beginning to move in the right direction?
Now you're going to ask me to go on to dangerous turf here for 1 second.
Please do.
And I'm going to delineate between Big Ag and Big Food. Big Food buys ingredients and creates food products that we buy. Big Ag helps farmers grow those ingredients. And I don't want to damn my friends in Big Ag, but let's be blunt here. Their industry is based on selling artificial inputs to farmers. And that they're going to want to retain that status quo. And what I will tell you is that if you look at the Bayers and Monsantos and Reals and companies like that, you know what? I think they're trying to move in the right direction. I think they're trying to understand soil health in a different way. There is a program called Climate Smart Agriculture that Big Ag has brought us, and a lot of people have joined onto that. It sounds great. Unfortunately, when you really look under the sheets, what it says is it will do less harm than the current products and practices are doing. Well, we have to stop doing harm, right? So that nature can heal. We just have to stop that. So, we like to say there is always a seat at the table for them to come and figure this out. And we mean that genuinely. Big Food is very different, because if I'm General Mills or Unilever or Mars or Danone, I'm going to do what's right for my business. And if I know that my supply chain around the world is collapsing, And if you talk to any of these companies, what they will say is it's horrific right now trying to plan where we're going to get our ingredients. We don't know what land is going to have a flood or a drought or a heat wave that's going to destroy it. We don't know where we're getting it. We don't know what the price is going to be. So they're very, very motivated. And when you say to them, you know what? You can actually help your farmers restore that soil and restore your access to be able to plan for your ingredients and do it in a way that's going to save you money, right? Because regenerative agriculture uses nature to supply most of the inputs that chemicals are supplying right now, right? This is where data really helps. So we need the data, but that's how it works. And those big food companies really don't care about the big ag companies. And of course, they're still somewhat dependent on them. But what they care most about is their own business. And if they truly see that and I hate saying this because a big ag will get this, but if they can do better for their business by not using those chemical inputs, they're going to do that. So I just want to make sure we delineate between big ag and big food. Big food is who I was talking about.
Yeah, very good point. Very good. And a very important distinction that's not often made. Yeah.
And we need all of us, and we need big ag. Big ag knows more about soil than any industry in the history of the world. We need them. We need their help.
Wayne, what would be your comment?
Are there any big ag companies that have bought into your story?
I would say, again, I'm being careful here. I would say they've all bought into it. And what I mean by that is, if you look at Monsanto, for example, and they're the poster child that we hold up for glyphosate and some of those problems, killer seeds. But if you look at Monsanto, their behavior in the years before they were bought by Bayer of Germany, Monsanto was buying up data companies, which is really interesting. They want to know what's happening in the soil. They want to know how weather is affecting things, and what's common to weather and soil is nature. So the truth of the matter is they are understanding that their products, their way of aiding agriculture must change. I don't think any of them will argue with what I just said. But I have to tell you, if I were in their business and I was dependent on the sale of these kinds of products, I would want to protect, my company and my industry as well, and figure out ways to utilize what we do, what they do, in a better way. And I think that's what they're trying to do. So the answer is unequivocally yes. That being said, this may not be a situation that has the room for chemicals like that to continue to be used.
Yeah, I'll jump in and thank you for that, Larry. The other thing that Monsanto was doing, in addition to buying up data companies, was buying up seeds.
Yeah.
And that was a very dangerous proposition to buying up and patenting the seeds and owning the seeds. And that's a very dangerous proposition that they were pursuing. The other thing I would just share, and it's a bit provocative, is that from a food standpoint, the only two foods that truly need to be global are coffee and chocolate. And a lot of the food companies are recognizing the need to move to more regional food systems rather than global food systems. And we haven't seen them fully embrace it, but they're coming to the realization that agriculture needs to be local. And so what does that mean to their business models? What does that mean to the future of their operations? How do they make money when food becomes local? And how do we ensure, as COVID reminded us, how do we ensure that we've got food security? and what's their role in that. And so I think it has their strategist at the table trying to figure that out.
Tom, Cherry Stover is asking why coffee and chocolate.
Those are the
My
two
mother
things
would agree with you, particularly on the chocolate, by the way.
I think those are the only two things that we could get humans to not be willing to make sacrifices for. Pretty much anything else folks would be willing to make a sacrifice, but to have to give up their coffee or their chocolate, that's too big of a stretch.
It also can't be grown in a lot of places. So you can't have it if you're looking at local agriculture. But, I will point out, again, in a very hopeful story, that we work with Barry Callebaut, the biggest chocolate company in the world. They, 1 out of 4 pieces of chocolate, I think, is sold by Barry Callebaut, or they sell their chocolate to Ben & Jerry's and, other chocolate companies. And we're working on one project with them right now in Brazil that it's with the Quilombolas. The Quilombolas are the descendants of escaped slaves that went and hid in the Amazon for a couple hundred years and learned how to grow food in a way that maintained the health of the land around them. And they now, it's estimated that they are probably growing anywhere from 14 to 20% of Brazil's food. And they're under threat, of course, because they're in the Amazon. And we're working with Barry Callebaut and one of the world's largest soft drink companies to, we've created a program where, and this could scale to 1 million farms. It's starting with about 8,000, but 1 million farms could, just in this one project, that will have the large corporations agree to purchase the production of these farms. So the farmers are guaranteed that they're going to get the income. They're no longer beholden to selling a commodity into the open market. But here's what's interesting. We're also measuring and quantifying and verifying the carbon, which has enabled the creation so far of 2 million verified carbon credits. So these companies also purchase their carbon credits that they're helping create, and that money goes to the farmers. In many cases, the Quilombolas are saying that payment is enabling us to save our land because they're trying to steal it from us. So, even in the chocolate world, and by the way, Barry Callebaut calls their chocolate forever chocolate. And what that really means is if we keep our farmers healthy and our land healthy, we can have chocolate forever. So, a little example of the kind of stuff that is going on right now that sort of ties a lot of that together. Coffee, I can't help you with, but I'm enjoying it every morning.
Wayne, what would you add as we bring this session to a close? Would be a final comment.
Whoa, what would I add? Well, I think one of the major issues we all have to face is the psychology of looking at the future. And I'm not quite sure how we deal with that, but I have spent the last 4 or 5 years or X number of years thinking about how the psychology of the world is going to be changing as we begin to confront this disaster, as Tom says, that's coming at us. And the only way that I've found to deal with it is to take action. That we all have to start to, in some way, in some little way, even if there are little ways, take some kind of action that will give us hope that we can slow down the train that's coming at us and hopefully avoid the disaster that's out there. So I'm somewhat hopeful, but it gets more difficult by the day. So I struggle with this and spend a lot of my time in my Buddhist practice trying to look at a way to hold it all. So that's my comment.
But I think you're making a very profound point that in the face of climate disaster, every action and choice that everybody makes counts in a very profound way. And that's just, I think, a good takeaway from this discussion is that all of our choices matter, and each choice either contributes to the solution or contributes to the problem. And that's the historical moment in which we find ourselves. So thank you for that, Wayne. Tamsin, do you have a final comment? Then Larry, then Tom?
I just think this has been really good to get to the, the root of all this. And I'd say, structuring for the local and the commons, and I'm super interested in the investing in soil.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. Larry?
Sure. The wonderful author Frances LePay died for a small planet, now died for a hot planet. I was reading an interview with her and it recently, and it changed my life, and I want to pass something on to you. The very last question that the interviewer asked her was, so given everything you've talked about with climate change and the fact that there's progress going on, do you consider yourself an optimist? Now, at my social change agency, my title was Chief Optimist. Now, I gave myself that title because I figured you can't work in the area of social change if you're not optimistic. You need that. But her response kind of rocked me, and I want to share it. She said, "No, I don't consider myself an optimist, but that doesn't mean I'm a pessimist." She said, "What I am is a possibilist." And when you think about that, an optimist bases everything on hope. A possibilist says it is possible, but we have to make it happen. So that would be what I would share with everybody here.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. It's come down to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I loved that the data point that cleaning the soil would save 25% of the global healthcare costs. That is an astonishing data point. So thank you for bringing that in, Larry. Tom?
I'll pick up on a couple of things that Wayne and Larry both have shared. I've been for over a decade now calling myself a pragmatic optimist. So I'm happy to be an optimist. My life has rewarded me with that optimism, but I'm very practical about it, very pragmatic. Picking up on Wayne's comment, I'm delighted to say that tomorrow's panel is comprised of people to help us think through how do we change the psychology. And I'm delighted to say we have Eddie Hart, who in the 1972 Olympics was the fastest human on the planet. He's joining us to talk about his experience of planning to win the gold medal for the 100-meter dash, and having that opportunity not happen, and then having to rebound the next day to and where he did win the gold medal for the men's 4x100 meter relay. And how did he speed shift his mindset to be able to take the worst thing that happened in his life and turn it around that quickly? And we've got Marilyn King, who had a car injury that prevented her from going to the 1980 Olympics, and how did she speed shift her mindset? And we've got Marilee Adams to join us to talk about change your questions, change your life. And so what are the assumptions that we have that are affecting our psychology? And how do we ask different questions, and how do we change our assumptions? And then we've got Sarah Moncada, who's a Native American Indigenous leader in the Bay Area, joining us. So we've got an engaging panel tomorrow that gets to your question, Wayne, about psychology and how do we shift the human psychology to deal with this climate disaster that we're dealing with. So looking forward to another wonderful panel tomorrow. And I want to thank Larry and Wayne in particular for being with us today and bringing your perspective and all the work you're doing to address both the carbon sequestration and the energy system change that's so desperately needed.
And thank you,
Tom.
Thank you.
Larry, Wayne, Tams, and this has been a marvelous conversation. I'd like to end our program, everyone, by just saying that today, Ubiquity University, which empowers Humanity Rising every day, is launching a Back to Freya Day, which is a rejection of consumerism and a return to the goddess of love. In the United States and Europe and in many places around the world, we're gearing up for a massive consumer event called Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, which is next Friday. So we thought, in honor of the COP, in honor of everything that we've talked about today, that we would assemble a collection of courses that people could take that would empower them through the pathway of the sacred feminine, to honor love and compassion and goodness and tenderness in the world at a moment when we're being encouraged by mass advertising to enhance the consumerism, which is destroying the planet and our role in it. So if you go to Back to Freya Day, that's FREYA, .com, backtofreyaday.com. I put the link in the chat box. You can see what we're doing. Freya is the Scandinavian goddess of love, sexuality, and abundance. And our name for the day, Friday, comes from Freya Day. So
looks like we lost Jim, but thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.